Hello there. Welcome to From Bollocks to Brilliance, the Power of Order. I'm Ian Rogers. I'm a Chartered Quantity Surveyor, Project Manager, Facilities Manager, Whole Life Cycle Specialist, Structured Finance Specialist. I am Process Engineer. I have a unique set of skills and experiences built up over many, many years. And hence I'm looking at projects in a holistic way, literally from inception all the way through to operational reality. And that's what enables me to have a look at the complete process all the way through in an objective way based on experience and reality. So what I'm going to be looking at today, looking at how we play the right notes, the project failures and what that is all about, how we shift our thinking and doing on projects, looking at the end game at the beginning, a piece about the whole information management process, looking at key activities, and then looking at the overall RRBA plan of work and how I think that needs to change.
You're playing all the wrong notes.
I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. I'll give you that. I'll give you that, sunshine.
Bit of fun there, but there's a serious message to this. We as the industry may be playing all the right notes, we may be actually missing some notes, but we are certainly not playing them in the right order. And that's what I'm going to try and portray to you in this brief presentation today, that we need to look at how we orchestrate the result properly, and we need to conduct a different tune to what we're playing at the moment. Currently, project outcomes are variable. From a McKinsey report, they state that 98% of projects fail. That is an incredibly high figure. That's basically nearly all projects fail for one reason or another, whether it be delays, cost overruns, disputes, quality issues, reworking, or other things. And this is something borne out in my own experience of working in the industry for many, many years and dealing with many construction projects, both on the construction side and receiving operational buildings, and how things hadn't been thought through, and therefore the operations has big issues, which leads to variations and all the rest of the issues that come out of the construction process. The construction industry is renowned for poor productivity. It sits below agriculture in terms of the productivity rankings, which is pretty dire. And the other thing which I think is wrong with the industry is the margins for contractors and the facility manager operators is very, very low. And because you have low margins driven by poorly executed competition, people inevitably then cut corners, quality and everything else, to increase their margins somehow, to make it pay and make it profitable for them. Whereas we really need to look at making it a quality product from day one, increasing the margins. Yes, that increases the cost up front, but it means the whole life cycle of the building is a lot more cost effective throughout its whole life. In other words, the operational part, which is probably 60, 70, even 80% of the total cost of a building, is much more effective and reduced. Therefore, we need to shift our thinking as to how we do things and what we do. The status quo in the construction industry is unacceptable. We cannot carry on as it is. Although BIM is supposed to have brought in collaboration, in my opinion, we are still operating in silos and the collaboration is not there. It may be there on specific projects to some degree or another, but true collaboration is not here yet, and it needs to change and is unacceptable at the moment. The project process, how we start a project, the rigidity of the whole process is unacceptable. We need to look at this and change it, and that is what I'm proposing in this presentation. So we need to start the beginning with the end game in mind. And this is a phrase I've used often, but it means looking at the end game and what the client and the project sponsor really wants from the operational requirements. So we really hone in on what they actually want to get out of the building or the facility to make it an effective and efficient operation. Then we need to bring that right back into the beginning and start specifying that in detail. We need to introduce fully collaborative, multidisciplinary efforts on critical aspects before the design starts. And I'll cover that off in a bit more detail. And then we need to iron out any design issues with digital prototyping before construction starts. Through the design process, we need to have much more rigid or structured sign-off elements within a flexible framework. So we have gateway reviews to sign off where we're going and make sure that we move forward properly. But we need one final effort before we get to construction, and that's a digital prototype, such that the client or project sponsor can actually see what they're getting and iron out any final operational issues by looking at things in a virtual reality situation. Because most clients cannot anticipate what it is from a 3D model or a 2D plan. They're just unable to visualize that. I mean, Ralph comes up with the example of a theme park where they've used this and they've run the theme park for 2 years in digital virtual reality. So they can iron out all the issues, get feedback from customer experience, and then make sure that the product is really top notch. So what are the first activities before the design team is appointed? Now, it doesn't mean that some design consultants can't be involved, but it's before the formal design team is appointed. And this is the reason for this is all this feeds into the documentation that the design team will formulate their proposals on, such that they can make full allowance for doing this properly. So we need to understand the big why, and it amazes me that a lot of clients don't understand why they're even doing the building or the facility or what have you. What is their vision for it? What are they trying to achieve for it? What are they trying to get out of it? And all those sorts of things. We need to produce a project initiation document. Now, most of you have probably come across this term before, particularly those of you that have studied Prince 2 principles. What I've done is I've taken this and expanded it to at least 35 separate sections. So it's a really sophisticated and in-depth document, building up all the information that we can at the very beginning. This then drives the project brief that is given to the design team. So the design team has full information. Some of this will evolve as the design team gets involved and starts testing and prodding things, obviously, but at least they've got a good chance of getting it right from the beginning. We also need to look at the exchange information requirements at this very early stage, again, before the design team is appointed. So this may need specialist digital information experts to help put this all together. And I'll cover this off in more detail on another slide. So in terms of information management, it is critical to establish at the project start with the client, the project sponsor and key people an understanding of the art of the possibility. We need to look at the data structure. We need to make sure that all people that are going to be using this data can use it. I mean, I've come across examples where facility manager has taken over a building that's been designed on BIM and they were really excited. They thought, wow, we've got all this data. So when they came to extract it, they couldn't do it. The database in the BIM model was useless because it hadn't been set up with the asset management data extraction in mind. And therefore they had to go back to their old traditional methods and rebuild all the asset management data and all the processes from there, where it should have been automatically straight out of the BIM model. Some of this is because the design and construction teams hold on to the BIM model. I'm even saying that the BIM model needs to be taken outside of that and held independently such that it can be used all the way through the whole life of the project in a synchronized way. We need to look at naming conventions so that the QSs can get the right data out of the model for their SMM requirements and producing the bills of quantities, that the schedulers and programmers can get what they want out of it, and as I say, the FMs can get all the asset data out of it, amongst many others. So we need to make sure that the naming conventions and the asset classifications are done correctly up front, so we have the structure there. The information documentation goes through various phases in terms of organisation information requirements, asset information requirements, exchange employer information requirements, and in the overall project information requirements or BIM execution plan. So there's various stages to go through to make sure this all comes together. We then end up with a master information delivery plan. And we also need to make sure that the common data environment is set up to take all this and that all parties can use that CDE in an effective and proper way. So coming on to the real essence of what I want to talk about is currently we have the RIBA plan of work, which has served for many, many years and decades, and it's a good framework for the designers to actually work their way through. And it gives a good structure and a process and ability to deal with that. What I had started to do was to take that plan of work and change it from just a pure design philosophy into a whole project philosophy. So I created all the different work streams, including all the current ones all the way through that are there in the current plan of work, and then adding every other work stream that touches a project. So you then had a complete matrix of everybody that's in touch with this project. So looking at what they need to do at their various stages all the way through the 7-8 stages of the current plan of work. And I thought that was a useful piece of work to do to try and get the context of how everybody should interface. And I met up with my confederate in crime and business partner, Andy Hamer, who will be present at tomorrow's live session. So if you need to speak further about this, by all means, please contact him and speak about that to him, as he will know that. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the live event tomorrow. But what we looked at, and I said what I was doing, and he said, well, that's not changing things, that's just adding stuff. We need to revolutionise what we're doing. So we went away and started looking at things, and this is where some of the stuff I've already talked about comes into play. And we've now come up with the disruptive plan. And this talks about the 3 stages before the design team is involved. So we start off with the project evaluation. So this is looking at the big why, as I said, and the vision, but it's also looking at what the client wants from a technology point of view, in terms of the building itself, but also from the operational part in terms of getting it together through the design, construction and operational phases. So we're looking at all the technology in essence up front and deciding which packages of software we need and all those sorts of things. Then each of these stages has a full-blown gateway review and sign-off on 2 levels. One on the client expectation level, and secondly on the technical aspects level. So we're getting this signed off as a twinned approach. And every single stage that we go through, all 9 of them, have this double gateway review. So unless it passes that gateway review, it will not move on to the next stage of the project. We then move on to the project viability. So we start to put together elements of this project. We may even start to look at a rough and ready feasibility study. Again, this is often not done at this stage and can be done fairly easily on a crude square metre or square foot basis. And what is often not done at this stage is looking at the operational costs, because it's focused on design and construction. And often what I found from doing this process, when you model the operational costs into this, it doesn't always stack. And that is often not found out until the building has gone operational. Therefore, we need to be very careful how we do this going forward. And we need to establish early on what is viable for this project. And then it gets signed off again. Then we look at the project setup. And all the way through these 3 stages, we're looking at the 3 elements of information management that I've already outlined. So by the time we get to the end of stage 2, we've got a very robust digital information plan. We've got a very robust project initiation document, because that's all done through the project viability stage as well. We've got a very robust project brief. At that point, we can engage formally with the proper design team. As I say, through these first 3 stages, we can bring in design consultants, construction consultants, or the FM consultant and what have you, to overview this and look at it from an informed point of view to make sure it works and that everybody has their elements covered off. But we need to make sure that we have this in detail. Then the design team can price this properly. And again, not have to cut corners because their price is too low. Now I'm going to hear the shouts of, well, we're adding costs into this. No, we're not. we're adding costs at the beginning of the process. And this is the paradigm shift that I'm trying to portray, that we have to spend more at the beginning to save considerably more later on during the construction phase and the operational phase. So by doing this properly, we're setting ourselves up for success. Then we go through the standard phases of the RBA plan of work of concept design, spatial coordination, and technical design. But again, this needs to be done with appropriate other people interfacing on this. The concept design needs to be tested at the gateway review for compliance with the project brief, the project initiation document, and all those sorts of things. The spatial coordination needs operational input into it, because this is where we're going to really get into the works of how this building or facility operates and actually functions properly. So this is where we need the experts in this area to look at the spatial coordination. I mean, in hospitals, which is an environment I'm very familiar with, we have a clinical adjacencies team that will look at the workflow from a medical perspective to make sure it works in the actual physical building. So all of these things need to be done. And at the end of spatial coordination, that is effectively where I think there should be a design freeze. So everything is signed off that this is a functional design, it works. Then we can get into the technical design, which is where we need to bring in the specialist manufacturers, the construction experts and everything else to make sure that the technical design is coming up with a buildable project. And then that needs to be signed off with all the elements that I've already talked about, including the technical design by all the experts. If we do that, when we get to the manufacturing construction phase, there should be no excuse for variations. I know there will be the odd occasion with ground conditions that haven't been picked up properly, but even if you've done a proper survey, you should pick up 90-95% of those. So by doing this correctly, when we get to construction, the whole construction process, A, should be sacrosanct in terms of the value, the contract value that's now been tendered, because it should match the expected budget that we've moved forward and signed off. And if it's going too high, brought it back into context at that early stage. So we need to make sure that this all comes together in an appropriate way. Then we need to have robust handover and training processes so that the operator can come in and look at this. And in some respects, the operator needs to be going through the actual construction phase so they can see where things are going in, so they know where all the pipelines are for real, the as-built live experience, if you like, and if necessary, take photographs and videos for the operational manuals. So we've got a lot more integrated and collaborative approach all the way through this whole thing. And then the operations should be easy from this point on, because we've got all the asset data. We should have all the scheduling and PPMs and everything else done before we actually get to the handover phase. So that on handover, it's bang, done, and the building can be operated. That saves time in that process so that the project sponsor and the client can get operating with this building a lot quicker than they would normally, rather than the usual 3 to 6 months mobilisation period. Particularly in the handover, if you've then done the fit out in parallel with that, you can really start to overlap things and condense the overall programme a lot more. But you spent more time at the front end getting it right. So that's why I'm saying we need to look at the whole thing in a different way. There's elements that are similar to what we're doing at the moment, but we need a radical change into how we do things. And most importantly, we need to harness the digital information that is now being generated to its true potential. So to say, I'm Ian Rogers. Hopefully you found that inspiring and want to look at this in a bit more detail. But in essence, the industry can't die, but it will if it carries on the way it's doing. It can't die because there's nothing to replace it. But the sector needs to change to be able to deliver infrastructure and buildings the world needs. But it can't do that if the status quo remains, which means that we'll carry on with low productivity and high costs. So all we're doing with this is shifting a number of things around so that we've got all the notes, every single note, in the right order. So we've got a fully orchestrated piece that comes out as a Tchaikovsky or a Grebe or what have you, rather than the chopsticks that we started off with at the beginning of this presentation. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'm open to take any questions. And if you want to learn more, please speak to Andy Hamer tomorrow at the live event. Thank you very much.